Attention! Are you a healthcare provider? If so, you can earn continuous professional development points accredited by the Health Professions Council of South Africa by watching a different version of this episode. To get your points, click on the link in the show notes below or go to aurorabcounseling.com. That's AURORABCOUNSELLING.com and search for Towards a Model of Intersectional Psychology. If you don't need points, then welcome and let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to Intersectional Psychology, the podcast that explores psychology's role in promoting social justice. I'm your host, Aurora Brown. I'm a registered counsellor in Cape Town, South Africa. I am glad that you're here. How are you? What is happening in your world? As always, please feel free to reach out with comments or questions via your podcast app or on social media. Today we are ending off our Dissecting Intersectional Psychology Starter Pack series, and next week we have our first guest on the podcast. But today we're tackling a big question. What would psychology look like if it actually cared about social justice? We're going to talk about what an actual model of intersectional psychology should do and how to make it work. Now, if you've been following our journey up to this point, hi Mom, you know we've laid a lot of groundwork in previous episodes. We explored what intersectionality means and why it matters to mental health and social justice. That was episodes 1 and 2. And we even debated whether psychologists should get involved in social justice at all. Episode 3 gave us a resounding yes, with some caveats. Now, assuming we're on the same page that mental health and social justice are BFFs, it's time for the how. How do we as counselors, therapists, or just psychology enthusiasts do intersectional psychology? What does it look like on a Tuesday afternoon at 3 p.m. with a real person sitting across from you? And how do we make sure we're helping in a meaningful way without, accidentally starting a small revolution in the counseling room? Unless that's the goal. Don't worry, I'm flying solo today, and I'll be your guide through this topic. Perfect. By the end of this episode, we should have a clearer idea of how an intersectional model of psychology can guide our work step by step. And yes, there will be an acronym, a fun one, to help us remember the key bits. Spoiler, it may or may not involve cats, because obviously. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfy, and let's dive in. Previously on Intersectional Psychology, a quick recap. Before we build our shiny new model, let's do a very quick recap of essential context. I Promise it's relevant and I'll keep it short. The full binge-worthy details are in episodes 1 to 3 if you missed them. So, firstly, Intersectionality 101. Coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, intersectionality highlights how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, class, sexual orientation, disability, etc., intersect to shape their experiences of privilege and oppression. In psychology terms, it means your client isn't just one label. They're a unique combo of many identities, and those identities can subject them to overlapping systems of advantage or disadvantage. In episode 1, we traced these roots in Black feminist thought and discussed why a one-size-fits-all approach in counseling misses the mark. For example, a Black woman's experience isn't just Black plus woman in a vacuum. The sexism she faces is often racialized, and the racism she faces is often gendered. Just look up misogynoir. Context is everything. Secondly, why intersectionality matters for mental health. In episode 2, we dived into how social inequalities and oppression, like racism, homophobia, ableism, classism, all the isms and phobias, can profoundly impact mental well-being. We noted that depression or anxiety doesn't just drop from the sky. Things like discrimination, poverty, community violence, or historical trauma are often the clouds hovering above. Counselors who ignore those realities risk blaming the fish for the quality of the water. Come on, it is a good metaphor. If the water is toxic, the fish will suffer. So maybe treat the water and the fish. In short, mental health practitioners can't afford to have tunnel vision. If a client is struggling, an intersectional lens asks what's happening around them, not just inside them. Thirdly, should mental health practitioners get political? Episode 3 was our soul-searching discussion. Is it really psychology's place to address social justice issues? After all, some folks argue that counseling should be apolitical and neutral. Just focus on the person's mind and leave society out of it. Well, we gently call BS on that. In a professional, evidence-based way, of course. As Gray pointed out in 2020, traditional psychology's obsession with being value neutral and its fixation on individualism have often led to a lack of critical engagement with systemic oppression. Claiming neutrality in the face of injustice is, not to minimize it, but it's like when someone else puts a large open tub of rich, creamy potato and egg salad in the office fridge and leaves it there for a week, and another week, and then another week. And when someone finally asks you why you haven't thrown it away, you say, "I didn't put it there. It's not my mess. I'm neutral. I don't want to step on anyone's toes and throw out their old food." And meanwhile, no one can enter the kitchen anymore without gagging on the ammonia smell of rotting eggs and curdled mayonnaise. I apologize to anyone who's listening to this while eating. Maybe I should have put up a content warning. Anyway, the point is, intersectionality calls us to abandon this illusion of neutrality and instead examine how power structures shape both our questions and inquiries and our clients' realities. Calls for marginalized people to claim a place at the table, in other words, allowing marginalized people to be a part of this fucked up system, actually colludes with and perpetuates the oppressive structures, the wonky table, rather than challenging these structures. When the table is the problem, we need to replace the entire table. We also looked at ethics codes and guidelines. Fun fact, the Health Professions Council of South Africa, or HPCSA, actually emphasizes that psychology services must be accessible to diverse populations and promote well-being in community contexts. In other words, yes, even the regulatory big shots say we should consider the bigger picture. Plus, the American Psychological Association and others internationally have been pushing for culturally responsive and socially conscious practice for years. So, there's a consensus. Mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. If a client's distress comes from, say, being unfairly treated at work because of who they are, then addressing that isn't being political, it's being a good counsellor. We also acknowledged some limits. No, counselling shouldn't turn into a soapbox rant by the counsellor. That's what podcasts are for. And we must avoid imposing our own agendas on clients. So, you're depressed. Have you considered overthrowing capitalism? The key is balance and permission. Our advocacy should be guided by client needs and consent. And we have to practice within ethical bounds. We're helpers and healers, not puppet masters or politicians. But sometimes helping and healing means stepping out of the office, both literally and metaphorically, and getting our hands a bit dirty in the realm of social issues. Okay, everyone up to speed? Great. The stage is now set. We agree that an intersectional approach in psychology is important and ethically justified. And now comes the exciting part. How do we actually do this? Why we need an intersectional model. No, you can't just wing it. You might be thinking, alright, I get it. Treat the whole person in context. Got it. Why do we need a fancy model? Can't I just use common sense and empathy? Absolutely, common sense and empathy are crucial. In fact, they're the foundation. But when you're in the thick of practice, especially with complex cases, it helps to have a framework to ensure we're not missing anything important. Think of it like this. You can cook a stew without a recipe, throwing in a bit of this and a bit of that, tasting as you go. If you're an experienced cook, it might turn out delicious. But it might also turn out bland because you forgot salt, or weird because you threw in peanut butter on a whim. Hey, it could work or not. In counseling, especially with intersectional complexity, a model is like a recipe, a guide to make sure we include all the key ingredients for positive change in the right balance. And once you have that basic recipe, you can tailor it to the specific tastes or needs of the guest or the client. An intersectional model of psychology ensures that we systematically consider multiple layers of a client's experience. It reminds us to check our blind spots. Maybe we didn't consider how the client's immigration status is affecting their anxiety, for example. It provides a common language for practitioners. If we share a framework, we can better communicate about cases, train new clinicians, and even research what works. It helps with accountability. A model can embed ethics and values like anti-oppression into practice, so it's harder to shrug off social factors because, well, it wasn't in my CBT manual. Without a model, there's a risk of intersectionality washing, a term I just made up to describe when someone sprinkles a bit of intersectional lingo on top of standard counseling and claims they're doing the thing. Picture a chef garnishing a dish with one leaf of kale and calling it a salad. A robust model forces us to go deeper than surface level acknowledgement. Also, having a model is reassuring. Social justice and psychology together can feel overwhelming, like we have to fix everything, everywhere, all at once. A structured approach tells us, focus on these elements, you don't have to do it all in one go. It breaks the elephant into bite-sized pieces. Or, if you prefer, it herds the chaos of many considerations into neat categories. In summary, a model acts as a roadmap. It doesn't turn us into robots. We'll still use our creativity and compassion freely. But it makes sure we cover the bases and truly honor that intersectional, systemic perspective we've been raving about. Alright, enough preamble. I've been edging you for long enough. Let's unveil this model already. The model of intersectional psychology? Alright folks, it's time to unpack this working model of intersectional psychology using a shiny new framework called PATCAT, developed by clinical psychologist Jeannie Covey. Yes, you heard that right, PATCAT. Is it a slightly ridiculous acronym? Perhaps. Does it evoke a mental image of petting a friendly cat? Absolutely. If it helps you remember, that's great. PATCAT stands for Philosophy, Approach, Theory, Conceptual Framework, Application, and Technique. Essentially, the 6 steps to understanding and describing any evidence-based model. In this case, a model of intersectional psychology. We mental health practitioners do love our acronyms, but this one's actually useful. So let's break it down piece by piece, keeping it real and rigorously intersectional. Firstly, philosophy, the big picture belief system. This is the foundation of our model, the big picture values and beliefs guiding everything else. In plain English, it's why we do what we do. For an intersectional psychology model, the philosophy is all about social justice, equity, and acknowledging complexity. We're saying loud and clear that individuals don't exist in a vacuum. Gender, race, class, sexuality, ability, and more all collide and combine to shape a person's experience. Our guiding belief is that mental health can't be separated from social context. If the world is throwing racism, sexism, or other isms at you, that's going to affect your well-being. And our model unapologetically recognizes that. We're essentially giving a scholarly middle finger to the old one-size-fits-all approach in psychology. The philosophy here insists on honoring each person's full humanity, their identities, their histories, and the unfair power structures they navigate daily. It's a stance of radical respect. We assume from the get-go that oppression and privilege impact mental health, and we commit to challenging those forces rather than treating them as an afterthought. There are 5 guiding principles for the philosophy of intersectional psychology. Firstly, everyone deserves to live with their optimal mental health. Secondly, caring for mental health means caring about the factors that impact mental health. Thirdly, the world is made up of interacting systems of power and oppression. Fourthly, those who are marginalized based on multiple dimensions of their identity face unique stressors that compound the impacts of marginalization on their mental health. And fifthly, trust each client to be the expert on their own lived experience. In short, the philosophy is fiercely socially conscious. Because if your head and heart aren't in the right place about your client's reality, the rest of your approach will be about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. So next up is the approach, meaning how we translate that lofty philosophy into our day-to-day stance as counselors, or researchers, or practitioners, take your pick. This is all about our role and how we show up in the room. Given our intersectional philosophy, the approach is collaborative, curious, and humble. The counselor isn't a detached expert studying a lab rat. We are active facilitators of the client's journey by creating a relational climate in which the client can come into optimal engagement with their environment. Secondly, we are advocates by centering marginalized voices, recognizing the expertise that comes from lived experience, understanding that coping strategies developed against discrimination can be more effective than theories conceived from privilege. And thirdly, we are allies by continually examining our own biases and how these influence our work, seeking to understand the relationship between our client and society. We pay attention to different layers of data in the client's life. That means not just the usual mental health checklists, but also the client's stories about, say, being a queer woman of color in a rural town, or a disabled immigrant facing financial stress. An intersectional approach demands that we actively look for the influence of social factors. We're gathering information about prejudice, discrimination, cultural values, community support, you name it. It's the opposite of shrugging off those outside issues. In fact, we see those issues as very much inside the counseling room. For example, if a Black female client comes in with anxiety, our approach isn't to immediately pathologize her or chalk it all up to personal weakness. Instead, we might explore how racism at work, sexism in healthcare, and other stressors are contributing to her anxiety. The approach is also about the counselor's posture and positionality. We practice cultural humility, ready to learn from the client's lived experience because they are the expert in their own life. Think of the approach as the attitude and angle we take. Inquisitive, respectful, and not afraid to bring up uncomfortable topics like power, privilege, and oppression. It's basically, I see you, all of you, and I'm here for all of it. Counselors using this approach might ask more questions about a client's community or identity. What's it like for you as a single dad on welfare dealing with those judgments? And listen between the lines for intersectional themes. Overall, the approach in PATCAT ensures we aren't wearing blinders. We engage with the client in a way that's holistic and context-aware. We treat the client as a whole person living in a real and imperfect world, rather than a bundle of presenting complaints floating in space.
Inconceivable!
Shocking, I know. Now, let's talk theory. This is where we connect the philosophy and the approach to established knowledge and evidence. In other words, what existing theories help to explain why this approach makes sense and how all these factors interrelate. Here we're leaning on intersectional theory itself. Originally birthed by Black feminist scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Hill Collins, which tells us that overlapping identities create unique experiences of oppression and privilege. That's the cornerstone. The idea that, say, the experience of a disabled Latina woman can't be understood by looking at disability or gender or ethnicity in isolation. You have to see how they mesh together. Our model also borrows from such critical social theories and blends them with psychological science. For instance, we rope in the minority stress theory, which in academic speak explains how chronic stress from prejudice can harm mental health, to give us insight into what our clients are up against. We also nod to systems theory and ecological models. Imagine Bronfenbrenner's concentric circles of influence to remind us that people live embedded in layers of family, community, society, all of which can support or screw over their mental health. Essentially, the theory component is saying There's evidence and logic behind looking at all these factors together. It's not just touchy-feely activism, it's backed by research that shows, for example, health disparities arise at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. Surprise! Being hit with two kinds of discrimination is worse than one. By grounding our model in solid theory, we can justify our approach academically, which matters because mental health professionals like to know there's a method to the madness. And if we can't explain it, we can't defend it. So when someone asks, why focus on all this race, class, gender stuff? Can't we just do CBT and call it a day? We have an answer, because science and theory tell us that context matters. Theory is the connective tissue that links our big philosophy, justice and complexity, and our day-to-day approach, humble, curious, holistic, to the actual techniques we'll use. It keeps us honest, ensuring that the model isn't just a soapbox rant. It's also evidence-based and coherent. Think of theory as the explanation engine. It helps us say, here's why the person's depression might require a different understanding. Because the convergence of poverty, racism, and trauma creates a distinct psychological dynamic. Essentially, the theory piece gives us the language and the concepts to make sense of richness and messiness of real lives in a clinical way. So we're not just flying by the seat of our pants. After theory comes the conceptual framework, the bridge between what we know, that is our philosophy and theory, and what we actually do in counseling. If the philosophy is our compass and theory is our instruction manual, the conceptual framework is the actual map we draw to navigate a client's issues. It's how we organize and make sense of all that information about identities, experiences, and systems affecting the client. Concretely, this means we lay out the key constructs and factors that we believe are most relevant for the person's mental health. For an intersectional model, our conceptual framework might look like a multi-dimensional diagram of the client's life. Imagine bubbles or boxes for different identity factors that all interrelate, intersecting with stressors like discrimination and poverty, and supports like community and family, all influencing the presenting problem. We want to answer questions like, what are the main drivers of this person's distress or resilience? How do these pieces fit together logically? For example, our framework for a given client might highlight how their low socioeconomic status, past trauma, and current experiences of sexism interplay to maintain their anxiety. And also how protective factors like a strong cultural identity or a supportive friend group buffer them. Rather than slapping a one-word diagnosis on someone and calling it a day, we construct a narrative or a model. For example, the client's depression is understood in the context of generational trauma from colonization, ongoing racial microaggressions at work, and a lack of accessible community resources. That framework guides what goals we set. Maybe we identify constructs like empowerment or identity integration as goals, not just reduce signs of depression. It's the stage where we connect the dots in a way that's more concrete than theory, but still abstract enough to guide planning. We're basically building a custom model for each client within the broader intersectional approach. Also, importantly, this conceptual framework has to be something we can communicate clearly to clients, to colleagues, maybe even to your supervisor who still isn't quite sure what intersectional psychology means. It brings in that transparency. We can say why we're focusing on certain aspects. For instance, if a client asks why we keep talking about their experiences as a gay man in a conservative church community when they come in for panic attacks at work, we can explain, well, our conceptual map shows that the conflict between your sexuality and your religious community is creating a ton of stress in your nervous system. Hello, panic attacks. So that's a key piece of the puzzle that we need to address. In short, the conceptual framework is our blueprint. It translates theory into practice by specifying which aspects of a person's intersectional experience we're targeting and how those aspects interrelate. It keeps us from getting lost in the complexity, or worse, ignoring the complexity. Instead, we embrace it in an organized way. Think of it as the difference between wandering aimlessly through a maze versus holding a map that shows all the twists and dead ends. With a solid conceptual framework, we know where we're going in counseling and why. Now we're onto the application, where the rubber meets the road, or should I say, where the bum meets the counseling couch. This is all about how we implement the model in a step-by-step, session-by-session way. In other words, what do we actually do with clients and in what order? Here, our lofty principles and framework turn into a concrete treatment plan or intervention strategy. An intersectional approach means that from intake to termination, we're weaving in our awareness of all those identity and power factors systematically. For instance, at the very start, we could make it standard practice to invite conversations about the client's cultural background and identities. Tell me a bit about your background. What's important to you? And any challenges you think I should know about? We don't leave those crucial details for later or never. We bring them in early and keep them on the table throughout. In the middle phases of counseling, application could mean ensuring our interventions align with the client's context. If we're doing coping skills, are they culturally relevant and accessible? If we're assigning homework, does it consider their real-life barriers? Like, say, advising daily meditation to a single mom working 2 jobs. How might we tweak that to fit her context? We might structure our work in phases that make sense intersectionally. Maybe phase 1 is building trust and validating the client's lived experience. Yes, the discrimination you faced is relevant to why you're feeling this way. You're not imagining it or overreacting. In other words, establishing the dual attunement frame or rapport between the client and the counselor in an intersectional frame. Phase 2 could involve helping the client name and unpack the different forces at play, perhaps through reflective exercises that map out their various identities and stressors. Remember that framework we created. We externalize the problem in order to separate the person from the problem, which counteracts oppressive, problem-saturated stories and empowers the client to feel competent to handle the challenges they face. We conduct a power analysis to understand how unequal access to power and resources limit the client's self-definition and well-being. In phase 3, we might focus on skill building and empowerment. Now that we've identified how, say, sexism or homophobia is affecting them, how can they cope or stand up in those situations? We explore alternative narratives to discover an alternate story that feels true to the client. We might role-play responses to a microaggression at work, or practice self-care strategies tailored to their cultural practices. Phase 4 could be about consolidating the gains and maybe even connecting the client to a broader resource network, like support groups, community activism, or literature by people with similar identities, so they leave counseling with a stronger support network and a sense of pride. We anchor the alternative narratives to replace the problem story and activate the client's agency. Throughout all these steps, the application is intentional. We're planning our counseling process with intersectionality in mind at every juncture. It's not a random mishmash of techniques, it's a thoughtful progression. For example, we won't dive into asking a refugee client to confront traumatic memories without first considering their current safety, their cultural healing practices, and whether interpreters or family dynamics need to be addressed and supported first. Aurora. Please excuse me interrupting my own podcast. I'm just here to say that I will never include third-party ads on intersectional psychology, which is great because it means that you can be sure all the mental health information and content shared here is free from corporate influence and bias. However, it also means that this podcast will only be made possible by support from you, the listener. So if you enjoy this podcast or find value in it, please consider joining my Patreon, or Matreon rather, for as little as $3 per month. Your contributions will be used to improve this podcast, to cover the production costs to research, write, record and edit each episode, and to host our guests. In return, you'll get exclusive Matreon benefits like bonus episodes, additional guided mindfulness recordings, early access to new episodes, extended episodes and outtakes, group discussions, and more. So just go to patreon.com and search for Intersectional Psychology. Thanks, and back to Intersectional Psychology. Application also means being flexible and person-centered. If mid-counseling the client encounters a new instance of discrimination, like a racist incident that really shakes them, our plan flexes to address that because our model prioritizes real-world impacts. In essence, application is where we say, all right, based on everything we know, philosophy, the approach, theory, and conceptual framework, here's our game plan for helping this person. Here's what we'll do first, second, third, and here's how we'll adapt if needed. It ensures the work is systematic rather than ad hoc. We're working smart, not just hard, meaning we're always connecting what we're doing to the bigger picture so counseling stays on track. And by being structured and responsive, we make sure that an intersectional approach isn't just a pretty idea on paper, but a lived reality in the counseling room that actually benefits the client. Technique, the toolkit. Finally, some action. And last but not least, we have the technique. This is the nuts and bolts toolkit, the specific interventions, exercises, or therapeutic moves we use. Notice that technique comes last in the PACCAT formula. That's on purpose. It's tempting to jump straight into fancy techniques as soon as we meet a client. Try this mindfulness app, or let's do a CBT thought record. But our model makes us pause and only choose techniques that serve the larger approach. As Niekerk herself likes to say, we want to be technique supported and not technique defined.
It's only a model. Shh.
In practice, that means our choice of techniques is driven by everything that came before. Our philosophy, which is social justice, remember? Our approach, which is collaborative and person-centered. Our theory, which is based on evidence-informed methods. Our conceptual framework, which are the targets we identified. And our application plan, the sequence we're following. So what do techniques look like in an intersectional psychology context? They can actually be quite diverse. We might borrow from any school of counseling or therapy. And you can incorporate your favorite go-to protocols as long as they fit. For example, we might use narrative therapy techniques, like the life story grid, where we invite the client to re-author their story, highlighting strengths and resistance in the face of oppression. Let's explore your life story and find the themes of resilience. How have you survived and resisted the multiple challenges thrown at you? Or we might deploy a classic CBT tool like a thought log, but with a twist. Maybe we include a column for noting social context. What were you feeling? What was the thought? And what societal messages might be influencing that thought? We might use mindfulness and grounding exercises to help a client cope with the anxiety spike they get when, say, they walk into a room full of people who don't look like them, teaching them to stay present and centered even when they feel out of place. We could bring in techniques from multicultural therapy, like the cultural formulation interview, which is a structured way to understand the client's cultural background and how they see their problems. Or we might practice assertiveness training, specifically tailored to the client's context. For example, a woman who faces sexism at work might benefit from role-playing how to set boundaries with a disrespectful male colleague. Another example For a client dealing with internalized stigma, which is common in intersectional identity struggles, we might use a self-compassion technique or an affirmation exercise that directly challenges those negative beliefs. Let's list positive affirmations that honor all parts of who you are, including the ones society gives a hard time. The key is that we have a rich toolbox and we pick the right tool for the right job. And because we're intersectional, we might also think beyond traditional counseling room techniques. Maybe connecting a client to community resources or advocacy work is a technique we consider, like helping a client strategize how to advocate for themselves or others in their community, which can be empowering and therapeutic. What's important is that each technique is intentional and contextualized. We don't do things just because they're trendy or we learned them in grad school. We do them because, given this client with these identities and these challenges, it's a good fit. And we're ready to explain that choice. If a colleague asks, why are you using bibliotherapy, that is assigning readings, with this client? Or why are you prescribing the Netflix series Heartstopper to a queer teenager? We could say, because I want them to see reflections of their queer or queer immigrant experience in literature or on TV, as a way to validate and inspire them. That aligns with our empowerment goal in this framework. In summary, technique is where all the planning comes to fruition in tangible actions. It's the stuff we do to help foster change. By keeping technique at the tail end of PATCAT and intersectional psychology, we make sure we're not just throwing random tricks at the wall to see what works. Instead, we're delivering interventions that are grounded in our philosophy and informed by our understanding of the client. The results, I hope, is a counseling process that is effective, culturally attuned, and genuinely transformative, not just a grab bag of exercises. And there we have it, the PATCAT breakdown of intersectional psychology: philosophy, approach, theory, conceptual framework, application, and technique, all working together in a beautiful, if slightly irreverent, harmony. By clearly outlining these 6 elements, we've ensured that our model of intersectional psychology is systematic without being rigid or soulless. This way, whether you're a seasoned mental health professional or just someone curious about why your therapist keeps talking about your childhood and your social media experiences with equal interest, you can follow along. Our model isn't just a theory, it's a practical, ethical, and yes, occasionally sharp-tongued guide to doing psychology in a way that truly gets the whole human sitting in front of us. Bringing the model to life. A case study or practice example. Meet Thuli. Thuli is a 7th grade student who uses a wheelchair in a public school that was never properly retrofitted for accessibility. no elevators, no power assist doors, and let's not even talk about the bathrooms. Administrators with the best of intentions and the worst of planning assigned student volunteers to escort her to the restroom during class time. Sounds practical until it wasn't. At the heart of intersectional psychology is a refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. The core belief guiding this case is that accessibility is a right, not a favor. Tuli deserves to move through her day with dignity and safety, not as a class detour for bored classmates. We start from the understanding that her distress is rooted in structural neglect, and that no child should have to feel endangered to meet their basic needs. In session, the counsellor prioritizes trust. Tuli reveals her story only after weeks of rapport building. That first tearful disclosure, it's met with validation, not with let's fix it energy. The counsellor stays calm, attuned, and collaborative. They explore Tuli's fears, clarify boundaries, and co-develop plans for her safety, and validate that the structural barriers causing these fears are unjust. Outside the session, the counsellor learns the layout of the school, reviews the official escort policy, and seeks insights from teachers. That broader context becomes critical to identifying what's harming Tuli and how to address it. Theoretical support here includes the ecological model, which helps us see how individual distress is embedded in systems. Disability justice frameworks centering access as a human right, and minority stress theory, explaining the cumulative effect of ableist hostility. But again, theory doesn't walk into the room first. Tuli does, and we let her lead. We formulate Tuli's case by locating her experience at the intersection of age, disability, institutional failure, and peer hostility. She's afraid to speak up because the same system that's failing to protect her is also reinforcing her silence. We identify her coping strategies: avoiding confrontation, staying quiet. We validate them and we build from there. Together, we explore how her survival instincts can evolve into advocacy, not because she must fight, but because she deserves support. Her case formulation becomes a roadmap, one that moves from isolation to empowerment. The first intervention is safety. We secure an adult escort policy, co-designed with Tuli so she's not sidelined by the solution. Then we work on her emotional well-being. Safety mapping, visualization, and storytelling to help her process what happened. Simultaneously, the counsellor meets with school leadership, not to demand quick fixes, but to initiate a conversation about infrastructure, accountability, and harm prevention. When the school cites budget limits, the counsellor proposes a community-led fundraiser. This isn't saviorism, it's solidarity in action. In reaching out to the broader community, the counsellor discovers that many were unaware of the school's outdated state, mistakenly believing that the law ensured complete accessibility. An anti-bullying curriculum is drafted. Disability rights are woven into classroom conversations. And yes, Thule's voice is central to that planning, not as a token, but as a collaborator. In the room, techniques include narrative therapy approaches to help Thule make sense of what's happening without internalizing shame. Role play for navigating future challenges. Psychoeducation about her rights and options. Grounding exercises for trauma recovery. Family system mapping, if appropriate, to identify protective adults. Outside the room, the counsellor coordinates with staff to model inclusive language and behaviour. They initiate peer education efforts, perhaps via a student assembly or a classroom presentation. They document their process to inform broader systemic advocacy. Perhaps this approach can be used in other schools or in other public spaces in that community. Intersectional psychology ensures that Thule's story doesn't just end with "she coped." It ends with "the system changed," because that's what real support looks like. If you'd like to see more case studies with applications of this model of intersectional psychology, check out the Matreon at patreon.com/intersectional psychology. Common challenges and pushbacks, also known as "but what if?" At this point, you might be nodding along, but also have some lingering "yeah, but" questions. That's totally fair. This approach does challenge the traditional scope of practice in some ways, and certainly stretches our comfort zones. Let's tackle a few common concerns that counselors or clients or random blue sky bystanders might raise about an intersectional model in mental health. Firstly, is this really my job? I'm a counselor, not a social worker / lawyer / activist. It's true, we can't be everything. And boundaries of competence exist for a reason. I'm not about to start representing clients in court. I'd be doing them a disservice. However, the lines between counseling and advocacy aren't as clear-cut as they once were, by necessity. Social context directly affects mental health, so addressing it is part of good care. Think of Maslow's hierarchy. If a client's basic needs are unmet or they're unsafe in their environment, our higher-level psychological interventions might not stick. Does that mean you personally must fix all those basic needs? No. It means sometimes we coordinate with or refer to those who can help, like social workers, legal aid, etc. And sometimes we take small actions within our capacity. And also, Maslow's hierarchy of needs culminates in self-actualization. But in a collectivistic culture, perhaps community or social actualization should be the goal. The key is teamwork and referral networks. You're not alone in helping a client. Also, recall that professional guidelines like the HPCSA or ACA competencies explicitly encourage broader roles. The American Counseling Association, for example, names advocacy as part of ethical practice. And the HPCSA guidelines for registered counselors emphasizes community well-being. So, if anything, not paying attention to these factors could be seen as falling short of our professional mandate in today's world. That said, know your limits. If the advocacy need is complex, for example, the client needs immigration legal aid, your role might just be to connect them to specialized services and provide moral support, not to wade into court yourself. An intersectional model doesn't mean abandoning your core role as a counselor. It means expanding your conceptualization of what helping looks like and collaborating across disciplines when needed. Another challenge might be, what if I have my own strong beliefs? Could I teach them to the client? Aha! Self-check time. Counselors are people, and people have opinions, sometimes very passionate ones about social issues. An intersectional approach is rooted in values of equity and justice. So chances are you as a practitioner are inclined towards those values too, or you wouldn't be listening to this. But we must be vigilant. The counseling is about the client, not us.
You have to be hyper vigilant, okay?
If, say, I'm very active in LGBTQIA+ advocacy, and my client is struggling with whether to come out, I might personally believe, come out, it's freeing. But maybe for that particular client, in their specific life, coming out right now could be dangerous or simply not what they want. I have to bracket my activism at the door in terms of decision making. I provide a safe space to explore all sides, and I ultimately support the client's autonomy. Intersectional practice actually helps here because one of its tenets is centering marginalized voices. In counseling, the client's voice is the one to center. It's a collaborative approach. So yes, be aware of the power you hold. Don't use this model as an excuse to bulldoze clients into certain social actions or viewpoints. Sometimes clients might not even identify with a particular cause or aspect of identity that you think is important. And that's their right. For instance, perhaps you have a client who is from an oppressed group, but they don't want to talk about that at all. They just want mindfulness practices for panic attacks. That is fine. You follow their lead for immediate goals. You still keep intersectionality in the back of your mind. Maybe their panic is exacerbated by discrimination, and you can mention that, but maybe not. Maybe you give them mindfulness practices that incorporate aspects of their oppressed identity. You don't force conversations that they're not ready for. The model is a guide for you, not a mandate for the client. Another common challenge: can one person really change systemic issues? This feels like just a drop in the ocean. I hear you. The ocean is big and one drop seems negligible. But here's the thing: many drops together make waves. In counseling, each positive change for a client is a ripple that can extend outwards. And each counselor who practices with a justice-oriented lens is one more drop helping to shift the tide in our profession. You'd be surprised how often systemic changes start with small actions. Think of Rosa Parks refusing to stand up on the bus. The support group I mentioned starting, maybe it only helps 10 women directly, but if it becomes a model that the local clinic then adopts and expands, now it's policy. Or maybe one of those women become an activist who pushes for broader change. There's a proverb: to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. Cheesy? Perhaps. True? I believe so. Also, consider that not doing anything also has an effect. It maintains the status quo. I find it less ethically troubling to try and only achieve a little than to never try and implicitly endorse the way things are. Burnout is a risk if you measure success only by huge outcomes. So measure it also in those individual stories. It's okay that we won't solve world hunger in our 4 p.m. appointment slot. Focus on what you can do, and remember, many others are working in parallel. In a sense, embracing this model connects you to a community of practitioners globally who are collectively pushing mental health in a more equitable direction. You're not alone in this. Think of it as joining a quiet army of healers for justice. When it comes to advocacy, it is important to keep the following 3 questions in mind throughout the counseling process. Firstly, what can you, the client, do to advocate for yourself? What can I, the counselor, do to advocate on your behalf? And what can we, the client and the counselor, do together to advocate in your best interests? If bandwidth is a concern, collaborate. Perhaps you partner with a social worker for the practical stuff while you handle the emotional work. Tag team. Or join a peer supervision group where each member takes turns doing a community task and sharing the load. Be strategic with your energy. And remember self-care. You're no good to anyone if you're chronically overextending yourself. Ultimately, integrating intersectional approaches is like learning any new skill. At first, it might feel like more work because it's unfamiliar. You'll be consciously thinking about things that used to be automatic. But over time, it becomes second nature. You start getting efficient at spotting what's relevant and what's not in each case. Your resource list grows, so you're not scrambling every time. You might even have form letters or email templates for common advocacy requests. I have one for writing letters to landlords, for example. I just plug in the new details. Once the initial ramp-up is done, it doesn't necessarily take more time than standard counseling. It's just more integrated time, doing different activities, perhaps. The empathetic, ethical, and empowered counsellor. We've covered a lot, and if you're still here, thank you for sticking with this deep dive. This model of intersectional psychology, or any model that aims to fuse social justice with mental health, ultimately boils down to a simple principle. Treat people as whole human beings in their full context. Easy to say, challenging to do, but oh so worth it. When I first started on this journey of blending advocacy with counselling, I worried that I might lose my way as a counsellor. Would I become too much of an activist and forget the importance of just listening? But what I found was the opposite. The more I understood my clients' social worlds, the more meaningful my listening became. Clients could tell I wasn't listening to their inner psyche in a vacuum. I was hearing how the world weighs on them and joining them in holding that weight, even if just a little. That's incredibly powerful for forging a strong therapeutic bond. Being socially conscious is naturally going to make you outraged at times. There's so much injustice to be outraged about. Outrage is not usually the most helpful emotion in a counseling room, at least not if it's coming from the counselor. But using this model, I've learned how to channel my outrage into creative maladjustment, as Dr. Martin Luther King put it. For the practitioners listening, you got into this field to help people, and likely because you have a big heart. Intersectional psychology doesn't betray that mission. It fulfills it in a bigger way. It lets you help not just individual hearts and minds, but also chip away at the external problems that plague those hearts and minds. It's the difference between pulling someone out of the river versus going upstream to see why they fell in. We need lifeguards and bridge builders. On some days, you'll need to focus on saving one person from drowning in despair. On other days, you'll mend the broken bridge so fewer fall off. Both tasks are important, and both are healing. For general listeners or clients, what can you expect from an intersectional counsellor? What can you ask for? Well, hopefully after this, you have a sense that you can expect more than just passive nodding. You should feel like your counsellor sees you fully. If you mention something like experiencing racism, they won't skirt uncomfortably or change the topic. They'll acknowledge it and explore how it affects you. If you're struggling financially, they won't just say, how does that make you feel? They might actually help you strategize or find resources. If your identities are complex, they'll take the time to understand how you define them, and they'll celebrate those identities with you. In short, you'll know that all of you is welcome in the room. And if that's not the case with your current provider, it's absolutely okay to bring it up. I'd like if we could talk more about how X aspect of identity or X social issue is affecting me. A good counsellor will respond openly to that. And if they don't, maybe slide them this podcast episode anonymously. But seriously, you deserve holistic care. For general listeners or clients, what can you expect from an intersectional counsellor? What can you ask for? Well, hopefully after this, you have a sense that you can expect more than just passive nodding. You should feel like your counsellor sees you fully. If you mention something like experiencing racism, they won't skirt uncomfortably or change the topic. They'll acknowledge it and explore how it affects you. If you're struggling financially, they won't just say, how does that make you feel? They might actually help you strategize or find resources. If your identities are complex, they'll take the time to understand how you define them, and they'll celebrate those identities with you. In short, you'll know that all of you is welcome in the room. And if that's not the case with your current provider, it's absolutely okay to bring it up. I'd like if we could talk more about how X aspect of identity or X social issue is affecting me. A good counsellor will respond openly to that. And if they don't, maybe slide them this podcast episode anonymously. But seriously, you deserve holistic care. As counsellors, we're responding to the times. It's an exciting time, frankly, to reimagine what psychology can be. Sometimes it feels like we're tearing down a wall between the counseling couch and the outside world, brick by brick. That can be scary. The outside world is chaotic, and counseling used to be a quiet little insulated room. But it can also be liberating. Now our room has windows and doors, fresh air can come in, and our work can go out. To wrap up, I want to leave you with a little story. You know I love metaphors and stories. Think of the starfish story. You've probably heard it, it's popular in social work circles. A person is on a beach littered with thousands of starfish that washed ashore. They're throwing them back into the sea, one by one. Someone comes and says, "Why bother? You can't save them all. What difference does it make?" And the person throws another starfish into the water and says, "It made a difference to that one." In counseling, each client is a starfish we're helping back into the ocean of life. Intersectional practice says, yes, keep tossing those starfish back one by one. And also ask, why the heck are so many starfish washing up here? Is there something wrong with the current? Pollution? Can we prevent this? Then start working on that angle too. It's not either or, it's both and. Help the ones in front of you, and whenever you can, try to fix the system that's stranding them. All right. I think that's a good note to end on. Intersectional psychology in practice is compassionate, nuanced, and action-oriented. It challenges us practitioners to step up our game, and it promises clients a more validating and effective healing experience. It's not the easiest path, but in my opinion, it's the one where we keep growing as humans right alongside our clients. And that, to me, makes it all the more rewarding. Thank you so much for listening to this rather epic length episode. I hope you found it enlightening, or at least thought-provoking, and maybe, hopefully, you got a chuckle or two along the way. If not, I'll keep my day job. But if you have questions, reflections, or your own experiences with these ideas, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out via your podcast app, on social media, via our website, or come join the conversation on the Matreon. Remember, be kind to each other, be kind to yourself, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed cat meme to get you through a tough day. Had to end with a cat, right? Until next time, take care and keep on shining. You are making a difference. Starfish by starfish. Thank you for listening to Intersectional Psychology. Please follow or subscribe to the podcast to get every episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Intersectional Psychology in your preferred app. It really helps other people find the podcast. This episode of Intersectional Psychology was researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Aurora Brown. For a transcript of this episode, please see the link in the show notes on your podcast app or go to intersectionalpsychology.com. You can also check the website or the show notes for a full list of references for this episode. A video of this episode with closed captions is available on youtube.com/@intersectional psychology. To support this podcast and get access to bonus content, including additional episodes and interviews, as well as more guided mindfulness sessions, please go to patreon.com/intersectional psychology. You can also chat with me on Blue Sky at intersectpsych.bsky.social and Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok at Intersectional Psychology. But mostly Blue Sky. Aurora Brown and Intersectional Psychology are committed to the Sight Black Women praxis. All episodes of Intersectional Psychology are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I, Aurora Brown, am not able to answer specific questions about individual situations. Always seek the advice of your health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this podcast. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call your local emergency number or any mental health crisis hotline. Everyone deserves good mental health.